Hello, in case anyone doesn't know me, my name is Kelsey Erickson Stroifert. I'm the Chief Public Affairs Officer for the Texas Restaurant Association. We are excited to bring you this advocacy-focused webinar today. We're calling it the Path Forward. And the idea really is to talk about, now that the elections are over, we know what the results are, and we know we have a really critical Texas legislative session coming up, a new presidential administration, a new Congress. So there's a lot of new, which means there's a lot of opportunity for us to really do a lot of good for restaurants at the state and federal levels. And so we kind of want to update you on where things stand, where we see those opportunities, and most importantly, how we can really all work together to create some big wins for restaurants. So with that, let me turn it over to Emily to say hello and kind of a welcome, and then we'll dive into housekeeping and get underway.
Great. I hope everyone had a fantastic Thanksgiving. And from what we can tell so far, it looks like people were out dining and shopping, and that's always great for us. And so I hope that was your situation too. As Kelsey said, I like to say it's game time. This is the most important work we do. And one of the things we like to say as a member of the Texas Restaurant Association is that you're taking care of your guests and your employees, and we're taking care of all the legal and the regulatory and the legislative policy that occurs at not only the federal, state, but also your local level. What's going to happen here in just a couple of weeks and has been ongoing now, I think, for several months, is our turn to go back into the Capitol for the 89th session and be sure that we do two things. We advance the agenda that Kelsey's going to walk you through. We are the best place to have a restaurant company, and we want to keep it that way. So we're going to not only look at policy and drive policy that is the opportunities, but because of the design of our Constitution and frankly how the Capitol works, it's also a tremendous amount of work protecting you from all the great ideas that once implemented are actually not great for you. And so we're gearing up. We're very excited to sort of get in there in January, but the big call to action for you coming out of this is you have to stay engaged. It really is so important that we take both sides of the aisle. We work together with all stakeholders, from food truck to the largest brand we have, and we come together and we raise your voice in the Capitol, and we protect you and we advance you. And the only way we can do that is if you stay engaged. And so Kelsey's going to talk a little bit about what that means. And the one, I guess, spoiler alert I'll give you is that we are bringing back our Texas Capitol Day for all restaurants and food service across the state. An amazing kickoff night, reception, fun, and then really get to the Capitol and work the entire next day together. And it's not only our board of directors, but we're inviting all operators and maybe even employees that are interested to come in and make sure that everyone in that Capitol knows how important you are and what an impact you make across the state. So we're blessed to have the best policy leader in Kelsey, Erica behind the scenes, who's her right hand. And I'm going to turn it over to Kels to walk us through not only what it means, but as you're listening, remember there's noise and there's fact. And we like to say that we're always going to bring you the truth, whether it's good, bad, or ugly. And I think that's what you're going to find today is cut out the noise that you're hearing and reading if you're on TikTok or whatever news channel, and let us really tell you what's going on and what it means to you and what the hard truth and facts are. And that's why you can trust us to continue to be your leaders when it comes to policy and advocacy. So, Kels?
Well said. And yes, shout out to Erica, who's running everything in the
Yes.
background and makes us look good. So thank you, Erica. So really quick housekeeping. Y'all know I always have to do this. This is a confidential discussion meant only for our TRA members, closed to media, off the record, not legal advice. We are recording and we will share this on our TRA members only resource page. So feel free to share it with your team. We just ask that you not share it beyond those folks, because it is a special member benefit that you get for being a member with us. And then please make this interactive. No one wants to hear me talk at you for an hour, I promise. So drop questions in the chat, drop suggestions, feedback in the chat. I'm going to monitor that. Erica's helping. So yeah, just engage with us and let's make this a lot more fun and enjoyable. So what are we talking about today? We're going to do a quick roadmap of what we got out of this recent election, right? Who are the people we're going to be working with both at the state and federal level? And more importantly for you, how does that adjust our advocacy plan? Where are the opportunities? Where are the pain points? How are we going to use this sort of map that we've been dealt, if you will, to our advantage? And as Emily said, we've got to work with folks on both sides of the aisle, regardless of their politics. And the good news is we have a really strong legacy of doing that. So we're not worried about that. if anything, we're excited to really have issues that both sides of the political aisle can really invest in and feel some ownership in. And then, as Emily said, there's going to be really important kind of takeaways and opportunities for y'all to really engage with us and help make this successful. So let's dive in. First and foremost, we had a major election, and sometimes the state stuff gets a little left on the back burner because we're all thinking about the federal election results. But some important things happened at the state level too. So, not a huge shakeup. Republicans gained one extra Texas Senate seat and two Texas House seats. They were also able to kind of hold some seats that people thought might be close. And really in the end they weren't. And to some extent this is good news for us because folks like Representative Morgan Meyer and Angie Chin Button out of Dallas are both huge champions of ours, folks we've worked with on property taxes, on childcare, on workforce development. So we're certainly excited to see some of those folks come back. Republicans also made some gains in Texas Courts of Appeals races, which does matter when some of our bills go through litigation. And so here's kind of the takeaway of what the hand we've been dealt, if you will. So in the Texas Senate, we have 20 Republicans, 11 Democrats, 3 freshmen. 3 doesn't sound like a lot until you realize that's 10% of the Texas Senate are going to be freshmen. So a lot of new faces. In the Texas House, it's 88 Republicans, 62 Democrats. So, certainly not overly tilted to one side or the other. And amazingly, we have 31 freshmen out of 150. So, again, a pretty large proportion of new faces and new folks that we're going to have to get to know. And then the other sort of takeaway is that although the Republican versus Democrat split is still pretty similar, Republicans have shifted to the right a bit in Texas. We had 15 incumbents lose in the primaries and runoffs. Plus we had lots of retirements. So, certain issues are going to be a little more conservative this session. That's just the fact. I'm not sharing my personal politics or views in all of this. This is just the facts, as Emily said. So things like school choice or vouchers, however you want to call it, those issues and the politics behind them have likely shifted a bit because of these elections. Outstanding questions. We know we have a President Trump coming into the White House. We know that border security, immigration enforcement are big priorities of his. We're going to talk about that a little bit later in the presentation. But what does that mean in terms of state politics and state policies? For example, the state has invested billions of our own money on things like border walls and enforcement. Is that something that's going to continue, or is that something that the federal government is going to take over more of that responsibility? Probably the biggest outstanding question here at the Capitol, I was in the Capitol this morning, and I think it came up in every single meeting, is who's going to win the Texas Speaker's race. So in Texas, the Speaker of the House is one of the members of the Texas House, and that person is elected by the membership of the Texas House. So it's not a position that you or I get to vote on. This is something that every member of the Texas House votes on the first day of the legislative session. The Republican caucus is meeting on this Saturday, the 7th, to make their endorsement for Speaker. Now, I mentioned that's just the Republicans that are meeting. The Democrats also get a vote. So those are some of the outstanding questions is, are the Republicans going to endorse Speaker Phelan again? There's a pretty big contingent that are supporting a challenger to Speaker Phelan. And so Saturday will be very telling in terms of, are we likely to see new leadership in the House, or are we likely to see Speaker Phelan be reelected in January? In January. The other big question here is, how do Democrats fit into all of this, right? They're the minority party, but they still have a good number of votes. And not only that, but to pass certain constitutional amendments and other pieces of legislation, you need 2/3 vote. And so you have to get Democrats to support those efforts. So there's a lot of disagreement right now in the Capitol around, do Democrats get to chair legislative committees, for example? In DC, the party in control controls all the chairmanships. Traditionally in Texas, it has not been that way. We've had both parties get to chair different committees. So that's going to be interesting to see how that plays out. The other big thing is what priority items are identified by our leadership. The reason that's important is, as we'll talk about in a little bit, the legislative session is very quick. Most bills do not have a good chance of passing. And so those items that are designated as a priority are often fast tracked and often have a much better chance of passing. Not always, but often. And again, guys, ask questions, drop questions in the chat box, feedback, etc. So here's what we're walking into. The regular session is only 140 days in every odd numbered year, so including 2025 coming up. The only requirement on our Texas legislature is that they pass a budget. Technically, they could come in, do that one thing, go home, and they would be in compliance with the Texas Constitution. Of course, that's not how it works, but that is how it could work. And they're passing that budget for 2 years, right? Which is somewhat unique in Texas. You know the players, only 31 senators, 150 representatives, so it's a relatively small group when you consider the size of our state. I always laugh in other states, they have, 100 senators, even though they're a much smaller state. So Texas is kind of unique in that way. And this is kind of the timeline. So a couple things to note. One, pre-filing of bills has already begun. What does that mean? If a legislator has a bill idea, they've already gotten it drafted, they can already file that bill right now today to be considered starting in January. It also means that Kelsey has a lot of catch up to do when it comes to reading all of these bills, because believe it or not, we look at every single one to make sure that there's not going to be some restaurant impact that we didn't anticipate. The session itself actually starts in mid-January and then it'll end on June 2nd. So very fast and furious. This is sort of how a bill becomes a law. This is the Schoolhouse Rock version of a graph. And why I like to show this is it shows, if you look at those percentages on the far right, that is the percentage of bills that if they get to that stage, they will actually pass and become law. So if you look at filed, only 19% of the bills that were filed in this 2019 session actually became law. And you can see as you move down, the further in the process you get, the more likely it is, that that bill will actually pass and become law. So really the takeaway here is the process is designed to kill bills rather than pass bills. For the most part, that's good for us because there's a lot of ideas out there and not all of them are helpful, right? So we believe in conservatism, not so much in terms of politics, but in terms of let's take our time, let's make sure that these policies make sense before we adopt them for the entire state of Texas. So all that's kind of the backdrop. That's the hand we're dealt. That's what we're working with. Now let's talk about what is it that we're actually trying to accomplish within this environment. And this is really our agenda summarized in very few punchy words, right? So first, we want to block new harmful regulations. This goes back to the medical adage, right? Do no harm. If we can get through a legislative session and save y'all from costly new mandates, new liability risks, new costs, new hurdles you have to jump through, that is a huge win because those are things that you really cannot afford to add to your plates right now. And we know that. The second is kind of the inverse of that. We want to help you save money, and we've got some ideas on how to do that. Third, we want to strengthen our industry's workforce. We know our industry is nothing without really hardworking, dedicated individuals. And so we need to do more to make sure we have that workforce, not just today, but into the future. And then speaking of the future, number 4 is improve restaurants' resiliency. What does that mean? We're really looking at these long-term systemic issues that impact restaurants so that you can succeed not only today, but you can really protect your investment moving forward. Don't be shy with those questions. So let's dig into the details of that agenda, right? So first is blocking new harmful regulations. Essentially, we need to play defense. Last session, there were over 8,500 different bills and resolutions filed. We actively tracked over 1,100 of them. What does that mean? I told you before, we look at every single bill to make sure we understand if and how it would impact our industry. In over 1,100 instances, we said this has a significant enough impact or could that we need to really watch it throughout the entire process and make sure that if there's any changes, any amendments that happen, that we're on top of what those mean and how they would impact some portion of our industry. Looks like we've got a question. Okay, Sarah, I'll get to that in a second. Good question. As I mentioned before, many of these bills that are filed, they would either increase your costs as a restaurant operator or they would increase your risks and liability, right? And so those are things that we're going to flag every single time. Now, we're not always against new regulations. We want to be clear about that. But we really believe the regulatory environment should be reasonable, should be fair, should be predictable. And we need to balance public health and welfare with innovation and entrepreneurism. I can't say that word today, apparently. Entrepreneurism. And that's really the key, right? Is balance. There are regulations we need because of health and safety, right? There's a reason we have building codes. There's a reason we require sprinkler systems. But you really need to look at the cost benefit analysis of those regulations, make sure they're fair, make sure they're the least restrictive, least costly, and that they really are tied to an actual risk in reality. Any questions about kind of how we look at those issues? So what does that mean in practice? These are some of the sort of most common topics that come up in terms of this topic area, right? So anything that changes the tip credit, tip pooling, credit card fees on tips, really anything to do with how employees are paid and whether or not they can accept tips, how the tip income impacts the rest of their income and minimum wage. Those are always bills that we're going to flag and we're going to watch and we're going to shape very directly. Anything having to do with junk fees, and I put that in quotes on purpose, right? Because that's become a buzzword. Who can say that they're for junk fees? No one is for junk fees. The challenge is, how do you define junk fees? What is is this certain fee a junk fee, or is it a legitimate fee that I expect and am willing to pay for a service? Anything in that category we need to be very careful about because that label is really being overused. Any kind of credit card swipe fee restrictions that make it harder for you to really operate as a business are going to be things we watch closely. Data privacy and AI. This is a growing space. You might think, why do restaurants care about that? Well, a lot of restaurants have loyalty programs. A lot of restaurants use third-party delivery, reservation platforms, right? All of those services rely on data. And we've seen that some of these bills that are filed in the name of protecting consumers get really burdensome and really restrictive in terms of what you as a business can or can't do with people's data. Alcohol regulations, another thing we always have to watch. Anything that deals with sort of employment relationships, right? So leave requirements, training requirements, e-verify requirements, those are always going to be things that we flag. Cottage food is a growing concern, right? Emily talks about the grandmother who makes lasagna in her garage and is able to sell that and compete with you, even though that person didn't have to get a permit and be subject to inspection and all of those costly requirements that you have to follow. So next is save restaurants money, and there's really kind of three subcategories here. The first is state and local permits. Last session, we had a bill that we were able to pass on this topic, Senate Bill 577, and it did 5 different things to really clean up and streamline and protect you, mostly from local health departments just going too far. The challenge here is you see 3 and 4 in red. Number 3 was prohibit cities and counties from assessing a local restaurant fee and a local alcohol fee from the same business, right? We saw this sort of stacking of permits and fees one on top of the other for the same restaurant. And we said, that's really not fair. If you're a restaurant, you should be paying one fee locally and be done. Well, some of our friends in cities and county governments have found a very clever legal argument to argue that this section of law, even though it passed, was signed by the governor, does not apply to them. And so they are basically ignoring the law and doing their own thing. To a lesser degree, I'm aware of one or two health departments who are still violating number 4 as well. So this session, what we want to do is we want to come in and basically strengthen those 2 sections so that cities and counties have to follow the law, crazy as that sounds. And we want to put some teeth in place so that if they don't in the future, we can actually hold them accountable and get them to do it, right? We don't have to wait for another legislative session to come back and say, no, we really mean what we said the first time. And because we have to come back and address this topic again, we want to do some other stuff too. So we're going to fix these 2 provisions and add teeth. Plus, we're also looking at, can we further rein in all the different local permits that are charged, right? There's a huge difference in the types of fees you're charged, the types of permits you have to get, how much they cost, how long they're good for. How can we kind of rein that in, streamline that a bit more so that you not only save money, but you have more predictability, right? You kind of know this is what I'm going to have to pay year in, year out. We're also looking at, can we create greater transparency around inspection rules? So this stat really jumps out to me. Depending on where you're located in the state of Texas, that determines if your health department is the state through the Department of State Health Services, or you could be regulated by about 200 different local health departments. Texas has, let me say that again, about 200 different local health departments who each have their own rules and their own way of doing things. That's not necessarily a problem on its face, but it does mean you have a lot of inconsistency, a lack of predictability. And honestly, we've discovered there's a real lack of transparency, right? Not all of these health departments have great websites or great email lists or great ways of communicating with you. So we want to create some teeth that make sure that they have to be more clear and upfront and transparent with you about what those inspection rules are. And then lastly, you may remember that this bill from last session had a piece about sound ordinances, and really the concept was kind of create a safe haven. So if you're a restaurant and you are playing sound on your patio or in some kind of outdoor space, as long as you're playing it at a certain decibel level and you're turning it off by a certain time at night, you should not have to go get a sound permit from the city or county, right? You're a restaurant, you're not a live music venue. That should just be part of your restaurant permit. Our friends at the city of Houston got that piece essentially stripped out at the very last minute. And so we're going to take another run at that this session. I'm going to take a quick sip of water and ask if there are any questions about this bill, because I know there are a lot of pieces to it. Okay. And the great thing about this bill is just think, if we can get this one bill passed, we will have created 5 or 6 different improvements in terms of the way that you work and interact with your health department. So I think that's a big win. Looks like we do have a question. So Nick asked, what criteria do you base your decision to track or pursue a bill? How do you prioritize a bill? And with so few passing, how can we impose our position on the legislature? All very good questions, Nick. You kind of just summarized my job in one in one comment. First of all, I'll say prioritizing is really key, right? There's a reason I show that slide about fewer than 20% of the bills that are filed actually passed. What that means to me is we have to be really strategic about what we ask for, because the legislature is only going to allow us so many bills every session. And the reverse is also true. We can only ask legislators to help us stop or fix a bad bill so many times, right? We always say you only get so many chits to use. And so you've got to be strategic about when you use which chit. And part of how we do that is we really look at not just, is this bill going to have an impact, but to what extent is this bill going to have an impact, right? Is this something that, a great example is last session we worked on a bill dealing with food allergies. And one part of that bill said you have to post a poster somewhere in your restaurant, probably the kitchen, that has some very basic information about food allergies. Now, we talked before about generally we don't like new regulations, new mandates, right? But in that instance, we said we're willing to live with that if in exchange we can get some protections for restaurants on this topic. So, what we did in that instance is we said, let's put some language in here that cities and counties cannot mandate food allergy anything, right? They just can't regulate in that space. We also made it very clear that that did not increase your liability and your risk. And so that's an example where we said, this is such an important topic, food allergies. I mean, it literally is life and death, that we're willing to shape it and have a poster requirement if we can get some of these other protections in exchange. So that's a good example of the way we really look at each bill. How bad, how detrimental is this going to be, or how powerfully good could this be? What else are we working on right now? And so where can we give, and where do we really need to stay firm and say this is just something that we can't accept or allow for some reason? Emily, what do you have to add there?
Yeah, I think that's really well said. And it's a great question. And I always try, even when we're talking with our own board, of the landscape that you're operating in. And I think we always have to be very aware of what is the priority of the legislature, where are the wins of the legislature, what is actively happening that we can't change. Because if you think about it, they're dealing with anthropology issues to zoology issues and everything in between. And so knowing that is also a really important lens, that we can sometimes feel like our issue is the only issue and that's how we represent it. But then we're also operating in a much wider and more diverse landscape. And so taking that into mind is super important. And I would also say being very, very smart up front about, and I think this is something Kelsey does really well too, is that it takes both sides of the aisles for great things to happen. And so I think that is also something that we've learned that we navigate really well, is it takes a collection of people to move something forward and to stop something bad from happening. And those relationships happened or happened long before the session starts. That's all the roundtables and the visits and the Texas tours, and all of those relationships become incredibly important, versus a single person walking in with an issue midway through session is going to have a zero chance. Those relationships, when these things come up, like this allergen bill, inviting Terry to the table because we are the voice, matters a lot. So I just want to add a little of that color, that we can be as purposeful and it can be the best idea. And Kelsey knows one in particular that is so important to me, and that it may just be that at that moment, it's not the right time. And that's just something that we have to learn to navigate.
The other thing I'll add too is, don't think that Emily and I make these decisions unilaterally.
Right.
There's so much feedback from you as our members that goes into all of these decisions. And obviously we can't host a member meeting and ask about every, amendment that's happening on the fly. But what we do is really the whole year leading into session, we are very intentional in gathering feedback from our members about where are your pain points, what would help you the most. And then, so that's how we built that agenda with the 4 items that we're going through right now. And then the other thing is we have an advocacy committee of our state board, and I am constantly pinging them throughout the session to say, hey, this bill just got filed. Here's where I think this could be problematic, but I don't operate a restaurant every day. You tell me, how would this impact you on the ground, day to day? And importantly, that committee is diverse, right? So there's single unit operators, there's chains that are in 50 states. And
Mhm.
so we really rely on them and you as our members to tell us what should we prioritize, and how, and also how can we make things better, right? Because sometimes there's a bill that maybe is okay but we could make better, or that's horrible but we can make good, right? And so just being nimble and being willing to like gather that feedback quickly and really incorporate it into what we're doing is, I think, one of our superpowers.
And Kels, I'll just add my example for all of you is redfish. We've got a call about changing the regulation of the
Mm.
size of redfish something else. Well, we don't want to answering those questions. First of all, I was like, I've
We
never
like
had
to eat
redfish.
redfish. That's about our
Yeah, I do
expertise on
now.
that topic.
But that's a great example where we could quickly get to a number of operators that purchase a lot of redfish because they're members like you. And we said, what is the impact? And within 24 hours, we had exactly what we wanted. So that's why you matter, is that we're not experts in all of this. And we certainly don't run restaurants. And we're very humble about that. So that's why you have to be engaged, because we need that expertise.
Absolutely. Great question. Okay, so 2B, saving restaurants money through credit card swipe fees. This is my personal passion project. Well, one of them. I love all my bill babies, is what we call them in the industry. But this one is especially fun because it really is a David versus Goliath effort. So y'all know a lot of this already, but the problem is we have a severe lack of competition and transparency in the credit card market. Visa and MasterCard control about 80% of their segment of the market. 10 banks control about 76% of their share of the market. So there's just no reason for these companies to not increase their prices year over year, right? It's a market that you can't escape. Everyone has to accept credit cards to stay in business. And there's no competitor that's keeping pressure on them to keep their rates low. The effect of that is that those fees are skyrocketing, right? So American credit card processing fees are the highest in the industrialized world and climbing. Our fees in America are about 7 times what they pay in Europe. It's pretty astonishing. And they're increasing, right? They've doubled over the past decade, increased over 50% since COVID. So it's a huge challenge, and it's a huge challenge not only for restaurants, but for every single Main Street business. So think about your gas station, your grocery store, your movie theater. And ultimately it hurts consumers, right? Because whether I'm using a credit card or not as a consumer, I am paying the cost of those fees because they are baked into the cost of every single good or purchase that I purchase. Every single good or service that I purchase. There we go. And so this session, we're being really bold in our strategy on this topic. And we're being bold because it is such a huge problem, right? That we need to be bold in order to move the needle on this. So we have really led in the creation of this group called Texans Against Hidden Credit Card Fees. I will type our kind of website that we're using in the chat so that you can see it. Really proud that there are already 12 groups that have joined this coalition, including the Texas Consumer Association, which I think is a huge step in the right direction, because when we've talked about swipe fees before, whether it's on DC, on the Hill in DC or in different states, it always gets characterized as a business versus business issue. And it's really not. It's a very small number of businesses on one side and every other business and all consumers on the other side. And that's the story that we need to tell not only lawmakers, but voters, so that lawmakers will listen. And so it's a very bold strategy. I'm not going to get into the details of what the bill looks like because it's still in drafting, and it's something that we're sort of keeping private from the opposition. But just know that this is really a first of its kind approach that I'm really proud to see Texas lead the way on. And that we're very excited to bring consumers into this fight, because I think that's ultimately what's going to make a difference both here in Texas and in DC, where we're also fighting this issue. The third component of saving you money is property taxes. Last session, the legislature invested $12 billion, that's billion with a B, in property tax relief. And we're really proud of the fact that we were one of the leading voices to say, not only do Texans need property tax relief, but we have to ensure it doesn't just go to homeowners, right? I'm a homeowner. Many of you are homeowners. We all want property tax relief for our homes. But in Texas, businesses pay most of our taxes already. And so the more that we take off the plate of homeowners, the more we're putting on the plate for commercial properties like restaurants. And so that message, thankfully, was heard at the Capitol. That $12 billion was not just for homeowners. It was for the entire everyone saw some property tax relief. So now we need to build on that, right? And the good news is the legislature wants to build on that. They want to do more. And so we will absolutely be a part of that effort. Um, these are kind of, I was invited to testify on this topic a few months ago, and these are the four sort of recommendations that I laid out. One is that balance between homeowners and businesses that we talked about. The second, this is called the circuit breaker. So for those of you who own a home, you know that you are protected from your appraisal value increasing by more than 10% year over year, right? So if you're in a high growth area and the value of your property doubles, you are not going to pay double the property taxes because we have these appraisal value protections. Previously, that only existed for homeowners. Now there's this 3-year circuit breaker that also protects commercial properties. The challenge is the legislature did this as kind of a pilot or a test program. And so we need them to continue that and maybe even lower the percentage, because I think right now it's 15%. And so as you can imagine, that's still a huge increase every single year. I won't go into the rest of this. It's really just about the appraisal process. And this isn't to say that these are the only 4 things we care about when it comes to property taxes. It's just to give you an idea of sort of the themes that we're looking at when we look at property tax legislation. Third is strengthen our industry's workforce. Again, there's a couple components to this. The most important or prominent in our work is childcare. Again, we created a task force, that's a bit of a theme for me, called the Employers for Childcare Task Force, or E4C. Our mission is to expand working families' access to affordable, quality childcare. You may be thinking, why do restaurants care about that? Well, every restaurant I talk to says I could use more employees, right? Either today or to grow in the future. 60% of non-working parents say childcare is a top reason they're not in the workforce. Add to that all of your employees who are in the workforce, but maybe they're not working as many shifts as they'd like, or they're not moving up to management because childcare is a huge challenge for them. So this is one of those ways that long-term, we can actually make our industry a better industry to not only work in, but really build a career in. So E4C has released its own sort of blueprint for session, its own policy agenda. These 3 I've listed here are our top priorities. And so the Restaurant Association is going to be a driving force in really getting some of these over the finish line, which we're really excited about. Any questions? Okay. There are always other bills and topics that come up that we're able to support under this workforce platform. We're always looking for opportunities to support Texas ProStart, other high school programs, community colleges, all of those pipelines that really get people to our industry. And we're also going to look for any opportunities to expand our foundation's initiatives around second chance hiring, foster youth, any other sort of workforce pipelines that can help build out our workforce. And then lastly is improve restaurants' resiliency. I'll be honest, a lot of this came out from Hurricane Beryl, from the May derecho, seeing what our neighbors went through with Hurricane Helene. It's just evident that these storms and these extreme weather events are going to continue to impact our industry. You could have the best, strongest business in the world, and if you don't have power for a week, that's going to be a huge problem for your business moving forward, right? And so our thought is, yes, Texas has a pretty strong economy, but even here, the cost of doing business is really increasing, right? And a lot of those costs are things like utilities and insurance and workers' comp, things that are hard for you to control unilaterally, and yet they have a significant impact on your business. So our thought is we need to be more present at the table when policy decisions are made around those big systemic challenges to make sure that you're going to have the economic and regulatory environment you need to really succeed. So here are some of the topics that we're looking at under this kind of platform. I mentioned the utility and the grid a few times. That's the big one. We want to look at disaster relief and preparedness. I had a meeting at the Capitol today, Janice Drucker, if you're listening, about bridge loans, right? How can we help restaurants that have been struck by a disaster? How can we help them actually bridge the gap between that disaster and things like an insurance payout or an SBA loan, help that may be coming, but may take a while to get there? How can we help you get from point A to point B? Tort reform, I get asked a lot, what does that mean? All that is sort of creating the legal environment where you are not going to face unreasonable, crazy lawsuits, right? Because every time you're hit with a lawsuit that's unreasonable for some crazy amount of money, not only does that threaten your business, but it makes the next bullet point more challenging, which is business insurance, right? A lot of the factors that impact how much your insurance costs and what insurance is available is tied to our legal system. And so we need to be looking at those two issues together. Also, just the process to get a building permit. And then another issue that keeps coming up is affordable workforce housing. Much like childcare, if you've got someone who really wants to work in our industry, they're passionate about it, but they cannot afford to work and live in our area, then they're not going to be successful in our industry, right? And so we need to look at our employees holistically and really think about, do they have the tools they need to succeed as humans? And that will enable them to succeed in our industry. Ah, Janice, thank you. So that's the agenda. A lot of big items, a lot of big work to take on, but we're excited about it. And we really think that all of these things have real legs, real opportunities for success. The one biggest ask, well, really all of these are asks, but first and foremost, we want you to join us for Texas Capitol Day. Emily mentioned it at the beginning of the call. This is something that happened at the TRA long before Emily and I got here. When we were here, because of COVID and everything else, it was really focused on our board going to the Capitol. But this year, we really want to broaden that out to any of our members. Please join us at the Texas Capitol Day. The nice thing is it's a Monday, Tuesday. So you could literally be gone from your restaurants for 24 hours on a Monday and Tuesday when things tend to be the quietest anyways. And you can have a really impactful 24 hours in Austin with us, meeting with your lawmakers and telling them why these priorities matter to you. I cannot emphasize enough how powerful that is, right? They are used to hearing from lobbyists and people like us who are paid to do this, paid to bring these arguments to the table. It is different when they hear from their voters, their constituents. This policy will impact me in this very specific way. Emily, what do you have to add to that? Oh, you're on mute.
Of course. No, please join us. I mean, what a better way. And you start here and then you go up to Washington with us next. But I can tell you we've moved the needle a lot. And I think of Skeeter Miller as my best example, who went from somebody who's visited the Capitol for years, and now he's actually being asked to be on committees with the legislature, right? So it's the best way because you'll have a staff member with you and you'll go one-on-one. We typically assign you to the district you come from, and you can actually say, I vote for you, and this matters to me. And whether it be the credit card swipe fees, some of the restaurant resiliency items, these all matter and they're super important. So I think it's the best way for you to leave, get there in time for the reception on Monday night, spend Tuesday and go home. It's one night in a hotel. So please, please, I encourage you to do this.
Absolutely. A couple other things that you can do to really get involved. Sign and share our swipe fee petition. Just copy and paste that link into your browser. It'll take you right there. And fill out all the questions, because it's also how we're really gathering feedback and information about how much you're paying and how those swipe fees impact your business. We are also asking folks to film a video testimonial about swipe fees. So if that's something that interests you, it takes 5 minutes. Our PR firm can do it for you. You literally just answer a few questions about, here's who I am in my business and how swipe fees are just killing me in my business, right? And it's about getting the word out, because if you talk to most folks, on the street, they have no idea what swipe fees are. They have no idea how they impact them, your business. And so it's about really building that education and making it very just very real and grassroots, right? It's not overly polished. These are real people telling real stories.
Mm.
Please, please, please make sure you get our Thursday evening newsletters. That is how we are going to keep you up to date all session long. And so it's the easiest way to just stay in the loop all the time.
Mhm.
Refer a friend. That's always a great way to help us really build out our efforts. And then, of course, we always have to make a plug to invest in our advocacy efforts. And the QR code is there so you can do that.
Yeah, and I'll add to that is it takes a tremendous amount of resources, in particular because the political landscape has become so much more complex and there's so much outside money that flows into Texas. And so if you're sitting there with your business, big or small, and you think, gosh, I'd love to give a few $100 or more to the TRA to make sure they can execute on the agenda, I'll be shameless. Scan the code and please, it does make a difference. We're such good stewards for the impact that we make on the budget we have, I think is really impressive compared to industries that spend a whole hell of a lot and don't get anything done. So that is my formal ask for you. Or if you know, maybe you have someone, maybe you have a rich friend. We all like rich friends. Ask them to contribute. I promise we put it to good use, but we need it because we have a big, big agenda. And I think Kelsey's going to go into federal. All of this is in Texas. We also will be very leaning in a big way because of the tax policy that you talk about something that's going to directly impact your business. It's going to be what's going on up there too. So we use some of those resources just to help support the local efforts. We can engage in the federal policy as well.
That's right. And that's the perfect segue very quickly because I'm cognizant of time. We're going to go through the federal landscape because, as Emily said, we are incredibly active in DC as well. So hopefully I'm not spoiling anything for anyone. President Trump won the election. As expected, Republicans will regain the majority in the US Senate. And now they will have a trifecta by maintaining control of the US House. But there's some key caveats to that. Several Republicans are leaving Congress before the next term starts. Either they, were appointed in many instances to a White House job or they're retiring or something like that. And so Speaker Johnson, who is still the speaker, will possibly have just a single vote majority. So what that means is that even though Republicans control all three of the lawmaking sort of entities, they are going to have to compromise and they are going to have to work across the aisle to get some things done. I'm not going to go into super detail on this. I'll just say really importantly that restaurants had a perfect record defeating tip credit elimination across the US this year. It's something we should all be incredibly proud of. I think it proves that when we take these issues head on and tell our story versus letting others tell our story, we can have really great advocacy success. Another kind of interesting tidbit is California voters defeated a minimum wage increase. I think many folks thought that California voters would never defeat a minimum wage increase. So again, it just goes to show that things can get pushed to such an extreme that voters push back and say, no, that's too much,
And,
especially when it comes to the economy.
and Kel's having a conversation yesterday with my good friend who runs California. You know, that's several $1 million fight. So just to give context to what it costs to defeat that, it's no longer just assembling people with a phone to action. It took major fundraising and a major push in order to do that. And we're talking millions upon millions. And so we just don't want to get there. We don't want to ever get to a ballot initiative.
That's right. Michael Aguilar, our friend, said that it's the first statewide wage increase defeated since the 90s. So a lot to really be proud of, not just in Texas, but really across the US because of the advocacy efforts of each state restaurant association and the National Restaurant Association locking arms, working together to make really great things happen. So here's our game plan. Here's what we're working on at the federal level. Republicans are already signaling that they're going to use a process called budget reconciliation in the first 100 days on taxes and probably some other items. Sounds like a lot of jargon. What does that mean? Budget reconciliation is a process that is not subject to the filibuster. So that is an opportunity for lawmakers to get big things done with a lower vote threshold. If you've heard of Obamacare, that was done with a budget reconciliation. Trump tax cuts, right? There's a lot of examples of big policy changes happening in that first 100 days when you still have momentum through this specific process. And taxes are probably our number one priority in DC right now. It's hard to pick a number one because they're all very important. But as Emily said, talk about an issue that just directly impacts your bottom line, right? And this tax fight is especially important because a lot of the current tax cuts that we're benefiting from as an industry expire next year, right? So they have to be reauthorized, renegotiated, et cetera. Not going to go through all of these, but I'll just say that these are some of our key priorities within this broader tax fight. And it is going to be a big package, right? So there's going to be some things that change, some things that come out. And so we need to be nimble in this fight as well. Probably those first two are our keys, right? Small business pass through and bonus depreciation and deductibility of business loans. Those are things that are going to really help you from a cash flow perspective day to day. Other things to watch include the corporate tax rate. So in 2017, then President Trump lowered the corporate tax rate from 35% to 21%. On the campaign trail, he promised to lower it further, all the way down to 15%. I think that's optimistic, but that's one of those issues, again, that's certainly on the negotiating table that we need to watch closely. And then also the media's favorite topic, no taxes on tips. You know what our position is on that issue. I think the most important takeaway on that here is that's one of a very long list of items at play. And so we need to not sort of get distracted by that bright, shiny object and lose sight of the things that are going to make restaurants as a business successful, which will in turn then make restaurant employees successful, right? You can't kind of divorce the two and focus just on employees keeping more of their paycheck. If the business isn't successful, they're not going to get a paycheck anyways, right? Any questions about taxes as I move on? Okay, these are 2 points that we have to really watch closely and be very, very proactive on: tariffs and immigration. Trump has said pretty recently that he plans to implement tariffs on day one of his administration. Some of that he can do without Congress, right? He can do unilaterally. So we need to take that threat, and it is a threat, very seriously. It drives me crazy when people say, oh, Trump says that, but he doesn't really mean it. He's not really going to do it. We got to take politicians at their word. If they say they're going to do something, we at least have to take that seriously. Could impact a whole host of items that restaurants need to operate their business. And of course, we know that those tariffs are essentially price increases that get filtered all the way down the food chain, so to speak. So that's something that we are working on with National very proactively. The same for immigration enforcement. Last time Trump came into office, someone reminded me recently, there were employment raids happening in Austin in particular, right? So that's something that we need to be prepared for. We need to be prepared for greater I-9 enforcement. We need to be prepared for executive orders around deportations and border crossings, and especially in Texas, how that all impacts trade and tourism and just day workers coming back and forth, right? So all of that is at play. This is also one of those where there's a lot of noise. There's a lot of really justified fear. I don't want to minimize that in any way. There's a lot of fear and concern, especially amongst our workers and our suppliers. At this point, we unfortunately can't tell people those concerns are unjustified. What we can tell them is we are deeply committed to working on this issue, to finding immigration solutions that are not only humane, but that are going to make our communities safer and make our economy stronger, not just for immigrants, but for every American, because we know that we need that labor force to really drive down prices and make our economy work. So we're deeply invested in this issue. I was in Washington, D.C. just a couple weeks ago, meeting with lawmakers after the election around what do we do now with immigration now that we know who's elected and who's coming into office. So our commitment to you is we will stay invested and we will keep you informed. We will share the facts and the materials and the resources that you can feel safe passing on to your workforce at every step of the way. Some other federal priorities we're going to work on. We won 3 lawsuits this year, 3 really huge lawsuits. 2 of them deal with the DOL, the overtime thresholds issue, and the 80/20/30 dual jobs tip credit issue. One thing we'll ask the Trump administration for is just codify those rulings into the rules so that we don't have to keep messing with the courts on some of these issues. OSHA had proposed a first of its kind heat hazard regulation, that got pushed back into January, so it'll be interesting to see, does that go away or change? Lots of stuff happening within the agencies that we need to watch. Swipe fee politics get more interesting. I won't get into that because we don't have a ton of time. And then Sarah actually asked about ERTC. We are now seeing the IRS issue ERTC refunds for the first time in a long time. So sort of the hold that was in effect is now lifted. It is a slow process. They are not sort of releasing all the funds at once, but the good news is that tap is turned back on. And now that the Trump administration is coming in, we will continue to press them to release those refunds for those who were truly eligible, right? We know there was a lot of fraud in the system, but those who were truly eligible should get that money, and we will continue to advocate for that. Okay. Last but not least, again, stay engaged. This slide has our great thermometer. You can see we have hit 81% of our annual fundraising goal for the year, and that's through October. So we have 2 months, November that already happened but isn't accounted in these numbers, in December. And the amazing thing is we actually can hit our goal. And I remember when Emily and I talked about setting that goal, I was sort of sweating because it was a big number. Certainly bigger than TRA has done in many, many years, but I think it's a testament to the fact that we have a record of delivering results that really mean a lot to restaurants of all sizes. And so we're asking you to invest in that journey with us. Return just a small piece of those gains that you've made, whether it was from alcohol to go or reopening during COVID or not paying taxes on your PPP loans, right? If you benefited from any of that, think about, can I reinvest just a small piece of that win back into the TRA pie so we can deliver more wins for you in the future? And it really is that trust and that investment that's going to allow us to continue to grow our impact. Emily, what did I miss? You're on mute.
Yes, I know. You think after years of COVID. No, I'm just going to say thank you to everyone. Thank you for getting on. Thank you for trusting us. I hope you know after almost 5 years, we care deeply about all of you and the work we do. And we love to be advocates. It just doesn't matter what the issue is. If it's impacting you in a negative way, we're going to be on it. So keep communicating with us. And I've got maybe because I had a Thanksgiving break and my daughters came home from college, but I have a lot of energy going into next year. I feel like we're well positioned. We have great relationships. And I think the things that we're bringing to the Capitol on your behalf are things that are going to make a real difference to all of you. So you need us excited and engaged. And I think I can speak to for both of us, although we will lose Kelsey for a bit as she welcomes her first child, which I'm so excited about. But Erica, myself, others will be deeply engaged. And we know Kelsey will be sending good wishes from home. So we're ready to go.
All right, last call for any questions or feedback or comments. Again, we recorded this. We'll make that recording available on our members only resource section of our website. Always a good place to bookmark because there are lots of great webinars and other content there. But in the meantime, as Emily said, just thank you. We can't do this work without you. We're passionate about it, as she said. And it's really our pleasure and our honor to get to represent you in the Capitol.
Yes, and I'm just going to add just real quick, don't forget we have our campaign, Buy Experiences and Not Things. We launched it over the weekend. Please make sure you share it. They're great little things like, fries or fajitas and not French, whatever, bulldogs, or we came up with all these really great
Tacos,
things.
not ties.
Yeah, fries, not ties. That's it. But I think We did it for you. And last year, restaurants that were sharing it really saw gift card increases, right? So we want people to buy a gift card from you. We have a website we're going to be launching to help you do that. But we really want to encourage nobody needs more stuff, but they certainly need a trip to your restaurant to celebrate the holidays or even Mother's Day and those beyond. So look for that campaign and share those images and really encourage your customers to invest in your business.
Absolutely. All right. With that, we will sign off. Thank you so much. Thank you, Erica, for running things in the
Yes.
background. And reach out anytime we can help y'all. That's what we're here for. And thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you, Kelsey. Good work.